Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this lunchtime's webinar. Today we're going to be looking at Auracast, and this is an introductory session introducing the technology and what it's all about. And we are fortunate to be joined by John and Ella from Ampetronic this afternoon, who are going to provide us with the technical content. So we are recording this session and we'll share the recording with you afterwards so that you can review what was said when you've forgotten it in a couple of weeks' time, or share it with people that can't join us live. We will have a quick look at passenger need, why we need to do things to help people. A quick reminder about hearing loops, and then we'll jump into Auracast, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. Do feel free to use the chat as we go along, so that you don't forget anything you want to ask. So why are we talking about Auracast, particularly the bit about it for accessibility purposes? So the latest stats from RTIG show that actually it's 1 in 3 adults, so 1 in 3 of us, so there's 21 people live on this call, so 7 of us are going to have some form of hearing loss or be deaf, and so that's a pretty large amount of the population. Once you get to over 55, more than half are going to be suffering from some form of hearing loss, and by the time you get to 80, 70, over 80% have some form of hearing loss, and about 1.2 million adults have a hearing problem. That means that actually they can't hear most conversational speech well enough, and so that's the sitting across the table talking to somebody, walking down the street talking to somebody, they struggle to hear what's being said and be understood, and of the 6.7 million people that could benefit from hearing aids, only about 2 million people use them. I think this is where what we're talking about today could really start to factor in, because the health service, for all it tries to do to help people that have got hearing loss, would struggle to scale up from 2 million people using hearing aids to 6.7 million people using them, but increasingly those people are likely to have headphones of some sort, and we'll find out more about why that might be important in a bit. So far, if you have a hearing aid, if you're at that point where you need one, and you need assisted listening in places where there's a lot of background noise, for example, the solution is hearing loops. We did a webinar back in January on this, if you want to find out about how they work, and how you might go about specifying them for putting into public transport. But hearing loops are pretty old technology. Originally, the Teslas of this world were playing with it 150 years ago, but the induction loop system that we now know as hearing loops was patented back in 1937, so 90 years ago. So it's been around, for a long time. The advantage is that it's pretty ubiquitous at the moment, and for bus operators in particular, it's something they're having to get to grips with, because the public service vehicles regulation, or the accessible information regulations as it's better known, require buses to be equipped with a hearing loop to help people understand what's coming out of the next stop announcement systems. And people need to be sat in the wheelchair area or the priority seating area to pick that up. That's the minimum area that the regulations require to be covered. But this is the first time the hearing impairments have become part of accessibility expectations on public transport. And so there's a lot of vehicles being equipped by that at the moment. If you want to find out more about those regulations, then feel free to join us for one of the regular sessions we have on that. And a key thing really with hearing impairments is that it's an invisible disability. You don't have a stick, you're not in a wheelchair, you don't have a guide dog necessarily, and so actually people will often sit anywhere. They find it quite challenging to sit in a priority seating area when the bus is got people with more obvious requirements for accessible seating and things like that. And so solutions will help break out of some of the limitations of hearing loops, and telecoils are going to be increasingly important. And that's where Auracast potentially comes in, and that's why we've invited Ampetronic to come and talk to us, because some of the leaders in developing Auracast and the technology and understanding it and rolling it out. So before I dig myself into a hole, I'm going to pass over to John from Ampetronic to talk to us about Auracast and what it is, what it can do. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Tim. I'll just share a screen. Bear with me just a tick. Hopefully now you can all see my screen.
Yes,
seeing nods from Tim, so I'm assuming that's the case. So before I get started, just a brief introduction of Ampetronic. Ampetronic are the world leaders in the design and manufacture of induction loop systems, and we also provide a number of other assistive listening solutions too. We've been around since 1987, so about 30 odd years of innovation in that space. And in the last few years, we have been at the forefront of the development of Auracast technology, working alongside our American partner Listen Technologies and being involved in the Bluetooth Special Interest Group. So that's the group that's in charge of heading up the development of the Auracast standards. So we'll talk about that in a bit more detail as we move through. Now, our product name for our Auracast solution is Ori, but you don't need to worry too much about that. We're going to be talking about Auracast in general. If you happen to see any Ori references, you can take that as a reference to Auracast in general as well. That might just be me that may have forgotten to change that in the presentation. So without any further ado, let's move on to the to the meat of the presentation. So Auracast. It's part of the Bluetooth low energy audio specifications. It's the first time Bluetooth has supported broadcast audio, which gives us quite a range of potentially new use cases for the Auracast solution, including wide area public assistive listening. So when we say broadcast, it's important to kind of define exactly what we mean by that. It's true broadcast. It's one transmitter to an unlimited number of receivers. And most importantly, there's no pairing or response required from the receiving device. You could probably compare it to very similarly to DAB radio, for example. It's out there, and you can connect to the appropriate channel if you've got the appropriate receiver to be able to allow you to do so. It's specifically optimized for audio. So low latency and low power consumption are two of the key parts of the standard. Just for anyone that is not clear on what we mean by latency, latency is effectively the delay of the audio entering the system until the audio exits the system at your ears. So when we have a low latency system, it means that there's very little delay, and it means that it will sync up with moving images, for example. So if there's a video to sync it up with, or we're seeing quite a lot in passenger information systems now of sign language being adopted as well on some of the screens. Because of the low latency of Auracast, it would allow that to seamlessly integrate without any confusion or anything along those lines. And low power consumption. The Auracast system, we're going to talk about the receivers in a bit of detail later, but essentially we're delivering it directly to a consumer device. So lower power consumption is very important. It ensures that the user can use the system for long periods of time without having to be plugged in or anything along those lines, or have very cumbersome large batteries. Then the other element of the Auracast standard is that there's significant improvement of audio quality over Bluetooth Classic. So it allows for much higher sample rates. It allows for much better high fidelity audio. So it's more comparable to that you might be used to listening to from a CD, for example, as opposed to something that may be a little bit lower quality, designed more for kind of speech communication as opposed to being able to replicate music and so on and so forth. The Auracast standard supports fully open or encrypted audio channels, mono, stereo, or multi-channel. So certain applications could benefit from having multiple languages, for example. So the multi-channel support would allow you to be able to do that. Auracast as a standard has quite a significant potential in terms of range. There is a power limitation to the standard, and the amount of power you can put through an Auracast radio depends on the country you're in. But in the UK, when we've performed testing, we've seen well over 100 meters of range from a single transmitter. So covering one bus, for example, should be able to be done with a single transmitter. The other thing that's worth mentioning on this slide is that the Auracast standard will be adopted on a much wider scale, with lots of consumer devices in both transmitter and receivers, which will increase the accessibility to the audio that we're delivering via Auracast. So now we'll move on to the timeline for the development of the standard. Now, it's quite important to note that Auracast specifications have been in development for over 10 years at this point, but we're still in the adoption period of the technology. So we're still seeing the adoption rate increasing, and once we get to that critical mass, as it were, we'll be able to see a much clearer use case for widely accessible direct to hearing aid Auracast products. So there have been a number of Auracast products announced already. So to give you an idea of the development speed of the technology, When we first launched our Ori technology, which was a couple of years ago now, there was about 90 consumer devices that were capable of receiving an Auracast stream. So that would be smartphones, earbuds, headphones, those sorts of things. As of March this year, there's well over 200 devices on the market now that can receive an Auracast stream. And amongst those 200 devices, there's a significant amount of hearing aid devices on the market. And just anecdotally, a customer of ours that we work very closely with in the bus market, in fact, he is a hearing aid wearer, and he let me know last week that he's been to visit his audiologist, and they've suggested a hybrid solution of both a telecoil and an Auracast solution for his next set of hearing aids that he'll be getting quite soon. So it gives you an idea of the market awareness and where the market is pushing towards with assistive listening products, and it certainly seems to be towards Auracast products. Now, I still believe there's an adoption period of somewhere between 5 to 10 years before we hit real critical mass for this technology. It's estimated that by 2027, about 80% of consumer devices will be able to receive an Auracast broadcast. However, the refresh rate of a hearing aid generally tends to be slightly longer than that of a smartphone or a set of earbuds or something along those lines. Typically, hearing aids are refreshed every 5 years in the UK, because that's the way the NHS go about doing it. So I expect you'll probably see a slightly slower uptake in the direct to hearing aid Auracast solutions versus a direct to a smartphone or direct to a set of headphones, which may warrant the use for a hybrid style solution in the interim period. But once we're at sort of 10 years plus, I would imagine you start to see all of the other technologies starting to be moved away from, and Auracast being the primary solution for delivering accessible audio. So how does an Auracast system work? In its most basic form, an Auracast system is essentially 3 components. An audio source, so that could be a microphone, it could be a PA system with pre-recorded information, an iBus, for example, something along those lines. A transmitter, so that's the transmitter that's delivering the Auracast signal. What I should probably mention here is what frequency band we're working in. So Auracast works in the ISM band, the 2.8 gig band. So it's the same band as traditional Bluetooth Classic and Wi-Fi. It employs what's called channel hopping. So across that 2.8 gig spectrum, there are 40 different channels, and the receiver device will effectively hop between those 40 different channels to find the strongest signal to avoid any clashes or any interference or anything along those lines with lots of other potential traffic in that area. So although there is other devices in that ISM band, which is the industrial, scientific, and medical band, if anyone was interested in what that ISM band means, because there are so many devices in that frequency range, there are methods involved in them avoiding clashes and avoiding dropping signal and so on and so forth. So it's probably useful for you to know that. So going back to the components, we've got our audio source. We've talked about the transmitter, which is delivering essentially RF at that 2.8 gigahertz, that Auracast stream, and then we have our receiver. And initially, we have launched a dedicated receiver, which can be part of the solution. However, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that there are already a huge number of compatible devices on the market that can receive an Auracast signal, and that's essentially where the technology will end up. There will be no need for any third-party receiving devices or anything along those lines. Users will be able to use their earbuds, which will have Auracast receivers built in natively, use their smartphone devices, which will have, again, Auracast built in natively, or their hearing aid, which will have Auracast built in natively. And to let you know, in terms of the manufacturers that are pioneering the technology, Samsung is a very early adopter of Auracast. All of their Galaxy range of phones, everything that they launched in 2024 onwards, will have the ability to receive Auracast, and their Galaxy Buds Pro 2 earbuds will also receive Auracast. And all of the other major players that you would expect to see from consumer audio are now adopting Auracast as a solution. So people like Sony, JBL, Sennheiser, and the like. The really important thing about all of this is that there will be no need to use any additional third-party applications with the majority of these. It will be native functionality built into the device you already have. So the user won't need to have any additional technology, and that ubiquity will remain as is. Sorry, bear with me just a second. We'll move on to the next slide. So very briefly, I talked about the proprietary receivers. Just a very quick overview of these. The proprietary receivers, we developed these as a stopgap. Currently, there isn't well, when we initially launched Auracast, there wasn't a huge number of consumer devices on the market, so we released our own proprietary receivers as a stopgap. They work very well in certain environments where the users are fixed. So traditional audio-visual type spaces like theaters, cinemas, those types of spaces, they don't lend themselves very well to transportation, because where would you hand out a receiver and expect a user to hand it back? Probably impossible in most public transport applications. So the receivers themselves are probably a little bit of a misnomer in this presentation, because they wouldn't lend themselves very well to a transport application. But we're at that point now where we're getting towards ubiquity amongst consumer devices where they will have that capability to receive Auracast. So moving on very quickly to the next slide. At the moment, the current applications that Auracast is ideal for are these. And that's simply because not everyone has built into their device at the moment the ability to receive Auracast. So these are good applications where we can hand out a receiver and the user can receive the audio. If they do have earbuds or a phone that can receive Auracast, they could equally use those as well. But we've got an opportunity to hand out a receiver in these applications. But really, the future use cases are likely to be transient applications where the user is just passing through. Currently, they're only catered for by Hearing Loop, because it's the only one that has the receiver built in, or the capability to receive without any third-party devices. But market adoption is growing rapidly in terms of Auracast, and once we've hit that critical mass, once we've have enough adoption, these applications are really going to be ideal to be serviced by Auracast. The major advantage of doing it with Auracast as opposed to an induction loop system, from my perspective, is scalability. An induction loop system requires wires to be installed into the material of a vehicle, into the material of a building. So if you're going on a bus or a train, it needs to go behind interior panels, so on and so forth. If you wanted to expand the coverage area in a platform, in a depot, or even on board a vehicle, it requires removal of panels and installation of more wires. With an Auracast system, it's essentially broadcasting over a large area. So in order to increase the area that we're broadcasting over, we essentially just need to add another transmitter. And the transmitters are all powered via Ethernet, or they can be powered via Ethernet, I should say. So adding another one into a network is very, very simple. It's just a case of one more node on your network switches, if you like. So before I move over to the next slide, just very quickly, the system can be set up in a master repeater mode as well, which is again speaks towards the scalability of the system. So if you are covering a large concourse area, for example, maybe we're talking about a large depot or something along those lines, essentially you only need to input the primary audio that you want to listen to into your primary transmitter, your master transmitter. The rest of them can be set up as repeaters and can be sent audio from that master transmitter as long as they're all on the same network. So again, scalability. So Auracast in general, again, we're looking a little bit at, our specific product, but this really is general about Auracast overall. It's true broadcast, as I say. So there's no, as we say, no response required, no pairing required. Because of that channel hopping that I talked about in the previous slides, there are multiple channels available. You can effectively stack as many channels as you want into an environment within reason. So it opens up lots of use cases, potentially things like multiple languages. If you're looking at more of a traditional AV type experience, you could maybe look at things like audio description. Where I think you'll find you're getting some interesting use cases, perhaps with people with neurodiverse conditions. They can then use their own device, their own headphones, their own smartphone to access the audio without having to look any different to anyone else, but also potentially allowing them to access audio that is clean, that doesn't carry with it any ambience that might cause distraction or anything along those lines. So I mentioned earlier about being able to encrypt the channels. It can be open or secure, which could be useful if we're looking at doing something obviously confidential, if there's a boardroom or something of that description. We launched the dedicated receivers when we launched our product. However, the adoption rate in hearing aids and other devices means that those receivers will not likely be needed for the future of the system. Probably in about 2027 onwards, we're going to be at that point where there's going to be enough end user devices on the marketplace where the receivers become less and less necessary. Now, again, the flexibility and the scalability of the system, I think personally, is its biggest strength. But also it gives you that forwards compatibility, a future-proof system. This will be adopted by more or less all of the consumer smartphone manufacturers. If it hasn't already been, Apple have made an announcement that they will be doing something with it in the last month or so. And Samsung already have adopted it. So two of the largest players in that marketplace are already using it. So an Auracast solution effectively gives you a future-proof assistive listening solution for the foreseen future. So this is some details about our specific transmitter, the Ori transmitter. But with that being said, the majority of the transmitters that were likely to enter the market will have a very similar setup. So two analog inputs will allow you to take a range of different configurable options, and two radios, which will again allow you to output a range of configurable options. So either two monos, one stereo. The two mono channels could allow you to have different audio on each one. And you can label each one of those channels with the appropriate label as well. You can, it will support power over Ethernet. It will support third-party control. So if there are some other control devices that you're using on board the vehicles, then potentially this could be integrated within those. And as I mentioned, it will work as a master repeater configuration if we're covering large areas as well. In the future, the dual radio potentially gives us some more possibilities. So we've already seen some announcements from other manufacturers for Auracast enabled input devices as opposed to output devices. So for example, an Auracast enabled microphone could be used on tour buses, for example, which would allow then for wireless communication with the Auracast transmitter, which could then be transmitted out to the rest of the vehicle. The key really is that this new technology gives us a lot of flexibility in how we can design a system, how we can integrate a system on board a vehicle or into infrastructure. We'll skip the receiver for now, and we'll talk about the consumer devices on the market. So I mentioned, obviously, the rapid adoption of the consumer devices. I mentioned that there was more than 200 on the market currently. I think it's important to address the hearing aid question, because obviously we're looking at this from an assistive listening perspective. Now, we've seen a whole raft of Auracast-enabled hearing aids enter the market this year. ReSound, who are a Danish hearing aid manufacturer, seem to be leading the charge. They launched the first ever Auracast hearing aid, and now they have a whole range of hearing aids across their product range. But all of the major players that you would expect to see in the hearing aid market, Phonak, for example, Oticon, have all announced Auracast solutions in this year or previously. Now, what's important about that is that the NHS doesn't necessarily have a standard hearing aid supplier. It's typically left up to the individual trusts to decide which hearing aid they use, but there's a significant number of them on the market now that are capable of receiving Auracast. And the interesting thing is that most of the hearing aid manufacturers are extremely enthusiastic to move away from the telecoil solution. And the reason for that is that a telecoil has to be of a certain size, has to be installed in a certain orientation in a hearing aid. In order for you to get the best possible induction into your coil, they need to be of a certain size, of a certain orientation, which limits the size or limits how small you can make a hearing aid. An Auracast receiver is smaller. It doesn't necessarily have, or it isn't as sensitive to orientation. So it means that they can start to miniaturize the hearing aids even further, but still provide the end user with accessibility options such as Auracast. So expect more hearing aids to enter the market as time goes on, and we expect the hearing aid manufacturers to slowly start to move away from telecoil, although they are mandated to have telecoils in them for NHS supplies. Whether or not they're actually activated is a different question, but we won't cover that today. Now, we've talked about the hearing aids. There are a whole raft of consumer devices that are currently available on the market that will receive Auracast. And I think it's probably most important to look at these from a general accessibility perspective. The hearing aids are obviously extremely important for hearing accessibility, but because there are a significant number more receivers on the market that can receive Auracast versus telecoil, for example, versus an induction loop system, it opens up possibilities to provide support to other members of society, and seamlessly and anonymously, which is very important. So using the native functionality in their phone, so Samsung, they have a control app that they call a broadcast assistant, and using a receiver, which might be the Galaxy Buds 2 Pro, or it might be the actual device itself, anyone can access the audio from an Auracast stream. And as I say, I think personally the largest group that could benefit from this would be the neurodiverse, being able to access clear, clean audio without having to look any different to anyone else, without having to take their own headphones off, and not being distracted by other things. So a little bit about system management software, as I mentioned, is able to be integrated with third-party devices. We won't talk too much about this, but what we're delivering here is a next generation digital solution. So it's important that they can be remotely monitored, remotely maintained, without having to get on board every single bus in a fleet to do routine maintenance and so on and so forth. So is Auracast the future of assistive listening? Yes, but it will take time. Now, we're probably a lot further down the line than we were expecting to be at this point in time. Because previously we were projecting that 80% of consumer devices that I keep mentioning was likely to be a bit further away than 2027. We were projecting more like 2030. But the rapid adoption of Auracast in consumer devices, I think, has perhaps reduced that time that Auracast will overtake the other technologies of assistive listening. So it is one of several options available at the moment, but most of those options don't necessarily lend themselves very well to public transportation. The only real option that makes sense in terms of ubiquity, easy access is hearing loops, because the majority of hearing aids on the market still have a telecoil receiver built into them. But eventually, as I keep saying, this will be overtaken by Auracast. Now, I do believe that there's going to need to be a crossover, perhaps a hybrid of both solutions for a period of time, to ensure that those that are using legacy devices can still access accessible audio. But I think that crossover period is going to be a lot shorter than perhaps we'd initially projected, which was 10 years. I think it's probably likely going to be more like 5. So that pretty much covers it from my perspective. I hope that's given you a good overview of the technology. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, John. I think that was really very interesting and shows what it can do for us. I mean, there's a couple of things that crop out, jump out to me straight away from that. You know, particularly in a public transport world where technology tends to have quite long implementation lifetimes. You know, anybody starting to think about, well, you know, what if we're going to buy new vehicles with new equipment and things like that are going to have, you know, a tech refresh of, you know, 7 to 10 years, then Auracast is something that really ought to be on people's technology roadmap, given the likely adoption. So therefore, you know, that's why we're talking about it today, because it's clearly the you know, the direction of travel. But you know, the other side of that is if, as I said right at the start, as part of the introduction, you know, if there are only about a third of people that have got a hearing aid that would benefit from one, the other 2/3 of people that, you know, haven't gone and got one because of the embarrassment factor, or you know, haven't got round to it, they're likely to have, you know, their own solution, which might help in you know, cover some of that requirement, and so therefore we can start to cover a wider population of people that have got hearing impairments. And the other one, before pick up on some of the chat stuff, is one of the real challenges that we've got with the accessible information regulations in Wales is that the Welsh Language Act applies, and so everything is having to be announced in English and Welsh, which causes a real timing problem with the amount of information that needs to be provided to customers, where actually, if you have 2 channels, you could subscribe to Welsh if you want Welsh, or English if you want English. So it might actually help. But one of the comments in the chat where we were talking about regulations. So whilst the regulations specify the need for telecoil, do they need to be updated to allow Auracast to be deployed? Well, they don't need to be updated to allow Auracast to be deployed. There's nothing to stop anybody rolling it out now if they wanted. The regulations would need to be updated, though, to make it mandated. And that's the sort of thing the Department of Transport would look at when they review the regulations as part of the 5-yearly review that they have to do. So 2023 regulations, which would mean a 2028 review. So at that point, they might decide to go, actually, we need people to be fitting Auracast over the next few years, so that by 2030 or whatever is decided, all local bus services have Auracast as well as telecoils to help with that crossover period. And then, perhaps at a later point down the line, they go, you don't need telecoil anymore. But those are the sort of conversations that are going on with the department. They are paying quite a lot of attention to it at the moment. We were demonstrating Auracast to some of the key parties in the DFT last week, and there was a lot of interest. And they also, at that point, even seemed to know quite a lot about it already. So, yeah, okay. Questions?
Did see a couple in the chat. Oh, it looks like you've already answered a few of them already, Tim.
Yeah. So one from Philip Locke: is the Auracast device shown in your presentation rugged enough for public transport applications, or is there a different device you would recommend or have in the pipeline?
The simple answer to that is the current device is not rugged enough for public transport applications, but we're working on a solution for bus, train, various other applications currently. So we are currently demoing the system, and we're looking for people to trial the system with. If anyone's interested in running a trial, we'd love to speak to you about it. But our roadmap currently is that we will be developing a specific solution for transportation, and perhaps even a specific solution for bus and train separately. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you have somebody, Phil Locke from Lothian Buses, says we are interested. So yeah, well, I'll put you two in touch afterwards, and you can have some conversations.
I've seen another couple of questions. There was one about an Ori relay, which picks up the telecoil signal. So no, we're not planning that at the moment. But what's quite nice is that most loop solutions will have an auxiliary output that will allow you to just take that straight from that system. The other solution, which is probably the simplest solution, is the transmitter has very flexible inputs, so it could be set up to take a feed directly from a speaker. So just a pair of parallel connections on the back of the speaker terminals, which would mean that then it's amplifying everything that's coming out of your public address speaker, post-processing, so the end user would have exactly the same experience as the person who's listening to it acoustically.
Okay, question from Andy. as a hearing aid wearer, I'm fully invested in technology. The key to mass market adoption seems to be that supported by iOS and Android. Any indications at all when this will come out?
Good question. So there are already a number of Android devices on the market. Samsung are the ones that are leading the charge with that. You'll actually start to see it in quite a few of their TVs as well this year. If they haven't already launched it this year, they did say they were going to. Apple haven't quite fully committed themselves to it yet. As Apple are, they're generally a little bit late to the party with new technologies. They would like to make sure it's all rugged and works, as expected before they adopt it. However, at a summit at the beginning of this year, one of their accessibility leads directly mentioned Auracast and said that they will be looking into integrating it into their iOS systems. And actually, their earbuds already support Bluetooth Low Energy audio. It just hasn't gone quite to the next step yet to support Auracast, which potentially could simply be a firmware update.
So I mean, last week, as I said, I was doing demonstration. I'd got some of the Ampetronic kit, and so we'd got the receivers that we were using, and I was using an S23 and an S24, and there were other people in the room that were able to use their existing headphones from Sony to pick up those broadcasts as well. A bit higher end ones at the moment, but they will come down the model ranges. There are devices out there already. Okay. Question from Mahendra: how do you intend for the metadata in the Auracast to be configured as they commissioned? Will it be smartphone-based configuration utility?
That's a fantastic question. So at the moment, there isn't a smartphone-based configuration tool, but there certainly could be in the future. So as I mentioned in the presentation, the transmitter can receive as well as broadcast. So potentially we could set it up via remote smartphone configuration. In terms of configuring the metadata, so at the moment how it works is it's either via the network or via link local using a laptop directly into the unit. And there's several things that can be done in the stream's metadata. So what's currently being worked on in the standard is the capability to tag something as an assistive listening stream. And actually we've proven that use case currently, but it's not quite been ratified yet, so that will happen soon. So essentially what that would mean is that the end user using their smartphone or the management app for their hearing aid can say, I always want to receive assistive listening streams. And that way there will be a tag in that metadata of the stream, and they will automatically connect to that assistive listening stream. But there's other capabilities that potentially opens up to us. So we could say, for example, I always want to connect to a Brighton and Hove stream, for example, or a Lothian buses stream, for example. So whenever you're at that space, you would automatically connect to it. Some of the manufacturers within the Bluetooth special interest group are looking at it from a kind of corporate level. So you could say, for example, I always want to connect to McDonald's drive-throughs every time I go in, but it gives you that kind of ease of connection every time you walk into a space, and that simple access, I suppose. There's another question here about two audio inputs. Can there be more than two audio inputs to enable different streams? So at the moment, there are only two audio inputs on this specific piece of hardware, but there is nothing stopping you from having more audio inputs and more Auracast outputs on any of the hardwares, and likely we will have a device that will have more output and input channels in the future. The only thing that's potentially stopping you is clashes with other Auracast, but as I mentioned, the channel hopping should avoid most of those issues. So yes, at the moment there isn't a hard piece of hardware available that does that, but there is nothing stopping you theoretically from doing that. That is a great question again, Mahendra. You've got all of the questions today. If two buses are stopped at a traffic light, will there be Auracast pickup confusion? If you are connecting at that point in time, you'll probably see both channels available. But there are lots of different connection methods to get onto an Auracast stream. You don't necessarily have to choose it from a list. And actually, I probably should have mentioned that in my my presentation. The way you will connect to it via the broadcast assistant, via the apps for your hearing aid, essentially there'll be a number of streams, kind of like accessing Bluetooth devices you've currently got, or like jumping onto a public Wi-Fi. So if you are connecting at that point in time at the traffic lights, you will see both streams. But the other connection methods that are available, there are QR codes available. There are RFIDs available, so NFC tags, and also potentially, this one hasn't quite been bottomed out yet, but Bluetooth low energy beacons. So that would tell you that in this specific area, there is an Auracast stream. Would you like to connect to it? So those connection methods need to be implemented to avoid any of those potential clashes. But if you're already on a stream on the vehicle and you stop next to another vehicle, it won't cause confusion and try to jump onto the other one. Each individual stream has a specific tag in the metadata. So once you're on that stream, you won't jump off of it until you give the instruction for your device to do so. So another question here, Michael. Linked to Mahendra's question, as I'm too slow typing. Can range of broadcast be limited? Yes, absolutely it can be. That's part of the standard. So simply turning up and down the broadcast power. So when we demonstrated this at a few trade shows, we were turning down the broadcast power to keep it at a very small booth. But equally, there are different power requirements depending on the region you're in. So in the US, you can have much more power output than you can in the EU, for example. So we had to have that capability to turn it up and down so that we didn't have to have a different product SKU for every single market we were selling a product into. Yes, absolutely. So potentially, so let me explain Michael's question a little bit further. So he was mentioning visual impairment where a channel could be picked up at a bus stop and trigger an announcement, for example. That absolutely could be a use case that this could be used for. And in terms of manual selection or automated, going back to what I was mentioning with the previous question, we can have a specific tag in the metadata of that stream, and it would require the user to one time say, I always want to receive that stream. And then whenever they go to a bus stop that has that capability, it will automatically connect to their device.
Mm. Mm. I think Mahendra's one, which we'll use as the last one, about priority so it can interrupt somebody's music, is a very interesting one. And
the simple answer to that is yes, but it's not been fully implemented in everyone's device yet. So this is something that we've had lots of conversations with Bluetooth about. So every smartphone, for example, and even hearing aid apps, all have that capability to interrupt what you're currently doing inherently. Because when you have a phone call coming in or anything along those lines, it automatically pauses your music or your podcast or whatever you're doing for you to be able to receive that phone call. So the API is already in existence in the in the operating system or in the app. It's just a case of adopting that for Auracast. So I believe Samsung already does it in some of their devices, but not everyone has fully adopted that yet because they haven't got to that point yet in their adoption of the technology. But that will absolutely be how the system will work in the future, because our number one use case for the technology is transportation. That's what we've been driving towards for the last 8 years or so, and we know that 80 to 90% of people when they're on transportation are listening to their own audio, so on and so forth. So it really only makes sense if they can then prioritize a stream and stay within their own ecosystem, if you like.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware of time. Been a really good set of conversations and questions. So thank you, John, for your presentation. Thank you to Ella for helping in the chat. That's most helpful. We produced a couple of weeks ago, you might have seen a briefing note on Auracast. You now, following today's session, know more than is in that briefing note, but might be useful to help explain it to other people. In terms of where we go next from here, as has already been said, looking at some trials. The department, the transport, is interested in helping where they can. So there's some trials being approved for at least one rail station going in pretty soon. Looking at trials for rail and bus, just to see how it goes down, find out some of the challenges. So yeah, if you want to be involved, then do get in contact, and I'll make those introductions. Hannah has. Can you tell us who and what station is trialing, please? Well, I believe, John, it's Bristol Temple Meads, isn't it?
Correct.
And it's your good selves.
It will be us providing the equipment. We'll start the trial, fingers crossed, everything working well, in the beginning of May. So first or second week of May will be when we hand it over to the station, and it will be running until early September. It might possibly be extended. We've already been talking about potentially extending it, but certainly May until September are the core dates that we have for the trial so far.
It's going to be very exciting. And then the big question is, what more do you want us to do around Auracast? Clearly, as people do trials and things like that and tests, we'll try and get some documents out, and get those written up as case studies. But I don't know whether there's anything else that you want us to be doing. Do feel free to drop me an email if there is anything. So if there is nothing else, thank you again to Ampetronic for your input today. It's been exceedingly useful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you've learnt something today and found it useful. And please do feel free to get in touch with us if you've got any questions or want to talk about anything else that RTIG does. Thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for watching this RTIG webinar. To find out more about RTIG and our work, then please visit our website at rtig.org.uk. Thank you.